This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this is our 2016-2017 NBA preview of the Northwest Division. Great discussion on tap. Special guests on board to help us break down these crazy five teams. Probably going to be one of the most talented and competitive divisions. We'll fill you in on why we believe so, but a lot of stuff to get into when you talk about this division, not just with the offseason moves that were made, but even with the rosters up and down and the head coaches that will be running them. A lot to get into. You know I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Don Mad contributor, right off one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna and PNC, my brother for another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. You ready to go to talk about this Northwest Division, brother?
Absolutely, man, because we have an amazing guest on the show. And salute to all the fans, listeners of the NBA Baseline. It is preview time, the second of our six. Dig in, man, because it's going to be an amazing show.
Yeah, man, you need to get your headphones ready, pull out your notepads. We got a lot of names to throw out, and we also got a lot to discuss about who may actually wind up being the top dog in this division. And on board to help us discuss these teams that represent the Northwest, our man from the Salt Lake Tribune, Tony Jones. We've had him on the show before. He gives us the real. He'll be on board to help us break this down in just a few moments. Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for tuning into The Baseline. You know how to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. We always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. Available on iTunes, Microsoft, TuneIn, Stitcher Radio, Player FM. Also available on Google Music and on the Roku channel. And then we're also simulcasted on the Sports Brothers. So be sure to check out those guys. They do great work down in the South Florida area discussing the topics of the NBA. And we love rolling with them. So be sure to download any one of these platforms so we can be your go-to resource discussing all things that are happening in the association. Now, as the NBA season starts coming around that corner, we know that it's time for you to start getting your paraphernalia ready. And in order to do that, Fan Essentials wants to be your go-to resource to get you dripped up and dipped down in the favorite sports gear. So in order to do that, what you need to do is check out fanessentials.net, subscribe, pick your team, and every month you'll get your team's gear shipped right to your front door. And in order for you to be able to do that, you got to make sure you first go to fanessentials.net. Prices start at $14.99 and $34.99. But if you go now to fanessentials.net, select your gear, select which price you're going for, insert the code BASELINE, you get 30% off for your first month. Let me say that again. If you go to fanessentials.net, get your favorite gear all lined up, go to the checkout cart, use BASELINE as the promo code, you'll get 30% off your first month. This makes a great gift idea, a great fan box. So be sure to get yourself ready for this upcoming NBA season by going to fanessentials.net to get all the essentials you need for this upcoming NBA season. All right, it's what you've been waiting for. This is our 2016-2017 NBA preview of the Northwest Division. On board with us, man. What would a Baseline show be without our brother hanging out there out in the West Coast, doing it big? Our man, Tony Jones, contributor, writer extraordinaire for the Salt Lake Tribune. Tony, thanks for helping us out, man, to break down this uber talented Northwest Division.
Yeah, I appreciate you. First of all, I appreciate you having me on. Second of all, I think that the description of the division is pretty accurate. I think that it might be one of the best divisions in basketball this year. I think that you can legitimately make a case for all five teams at the end of the year being in the playoff race. So I think that it's going to be a really good and a really competitive and really talented division, and a division that you look at that can only get better for the future just because of the youth and that talent throughout the division.
Tony, you're bringing up some really great points. We haven't even started looking and digging into each of these teams that are going to represent the division. But it's interesting because, Sean and I just recently had done our preview regarding the Pacific Division. And while the Pacific Division is laden with extraordinary players, when we talk about the word talent, does that translate to wins when we're talking about teams like the Utah Jazz, the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have really struggled to kind of supplant themselves? Right now, the Beasts are clearly the Portland Trailblazers, Oklahoma City Thunder. We'll get into each of those teams. But from your perspective, what do you think is going to be the hardest thing to really take away in order for us to say, yeah, this is a team that we're going to be talking about in the same breath like we talk about the Southwest divisions in years past, where it was just top to bottom, all of that talent equals out to being a dominating division?
That's a great question, and one with a lot of layers to it in terms of the answer. I think that the biggest question and the biggest challenge that are facing, I would say, the Utah Jazz, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Denver Nuggets. And I say this because the Oklahoma City Thunder, they've been established for a while, and the Portland Trailblazers, the beat has gone on for a while for them. But for the Nuggets and the Jazz and the Timberwolves, can they turn that talent into production? That's the great question heading into the season. It's going to be fascinating to see how all three of those teams deal with, pressure, a certain amount of pressure for a certain amount of teams. But it'll be interesting to see how the Jazz deal with pressure and expectation. It'll be interesting to see how that young Timberwolves squad with all of that great talent and potential, how they adjust to Tom Thibodeau now leading the franchise, and the same thing for Denver. I mean, you can make a case for Denver being one of the top to bottom, one of the more talented and deeper teams in the NBA. Now I think that whichever one of these teams can find that consistency over 82 games, over back-to-backs and, 4 games in 5 nights and, long 5-game road trips, those are the team. That's going to be the team that's ultimately going to be successful. But, all three fan bases for those teams, I think heading into September 25th and September 26th, when training camp pretty much universally starts for the entire NBA, all three of those fan bases really have a lot to be hopeful for heading into the season.
All right, well, let's go ahead and dig right into it. The first team, obviously, and we work our way from the bottom up. Last season, the Minnesota Timberwolves finished last in the division with the 29-53 mark. While the team did show improvement from an offensive perspective, scoring roughly around 102 points per game, their defense was atrocious, basically among one of the worst in the league, if not the worst in the league, a little over 106. The big addition, everybody knows it, Tom Tibbs. He now runs the reins out in Minnesota. You add on top of an impressive first season by the big cat, Karl Anthony Towns, and really an impressive draft in getting Chris Dunn. Tony, let's go ahead and dig right into it. The first thing that I think about the Minnesota Timberwolves, if the intent is that you're getting Tom Tibbs, you want this young, talented team to use that athleticism to start stopping baskets instead of just about them putting up baskets.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be ultimately where I think that Thibodeau is going to make his biggest impact on this team. When you have a guy like that come in, just in terms of name recognition, just in terms of, what kind of coach he is, I mean, he's going to automatically demand respect from the personnel that he has. And I think that he's automatically going to demand and be able to hold these players accountable, more accountable than, your regular run-of-the-mill new coach. So I expect them to be better defensively. And, the team, the potential of this team defensively is really good. I mean, Ricky Rubio, he's one of the better defensive point guards in the league. He has his issues, but, staying in front of people and stopping people is not one of them. Zach LaVine, he has good defensive potential. Andrew Wiggins, I think that he can be a really good perimeter defender. And same that you can say for Karl Anthony Towns on the interior. Now, the question with the Timberwolves are defensively, can this team be versatile, when they match up with a Golden State or when they match up with a team that can go small with a mobile power forward, and all of a sudden you have Gorgie Jang guarding pick and rolls. Can Gorgie Jang at that power forward spot be able to stay with guys on the perimeter, or is he going to be compromised? So the personnel is a question mark defensively, but I think that this team can go from giving up 106 points a game to being significantly better in that category.
Yeah, I think this is a team that most everybody in the NBA circles and outside are looking to see probably take the biggest leap in terms of overall improvement from a season ago. I think they're going to be an NBA 2K fan favorite as well, too, because of Karl Anthony Towns and guys like that. And my question, I guess, for you now is when you look at this roster holistically, you're looking at Karl Anthony Towns specifically, are we expecting to see kind of like an Anthony Davis type jump from year 1 to year 2? And Cat started off with a better rookie year than AD did, a few seasons ago. But are we looking at like a superstar level talent, a guy who can go very easily average maybe 22, 24, and 10 rebounds a game?
Yeah, I think that you could legitimately make the case that Karl Anthony Towns has been the best big to enter the league since Tim Duncan. And, we're talking Yao Ming, we're talking Dwight Howard, we're talking Anthony Davis in 2012. I think that, Karl Anthony Towns, you can make the case that he's been better. He was better than all of them last year. Now, I think that he absolutely has superstar potential. I think that he can make up the ground to turn that potential into superstar production as early as this year. I think that as early as this year, he can start making the All-Star. He can make the All-Star team. His biggest challenge is to turn all of that potential and production, which I expect him to have, and have it impact you in the win-loss column, because that's what the truly great guys do. And for all of Anthony Davis's talent and for all of his production, you can argue that he hasn't, on the whole, even though his franchise has been rocked with injury and bad luck and shoddy coaching, you can argue that he hasn't impacted the win-loss column as much as you would want him to. So I think that that's going to be the big challenge for Karl Anthony Towns. Can he be the man in the last 5 minutes of the game and carry you and get the key buckets when needed on a nightly basis? Can he be that defensive anchor, and can he be that rim protector that they need defensively on a nightly basis? I think that he can. I think that this is where Kevin Garnett's influence on and off the floor is going to be ginormous for this franchise, and especially for Towns. And I think the world of his ability, and I think that he's got the potential to one day be the best player in the league.
Tony Jones joining us here in the Baseline NBA podcast, a 2016-2017 NBA preview of the Northwest Division, talking Minnesota Timberwolves basketball. Tony, when you think about this basketball team, and I'm looking at them from, statistically from a per 36 minute, and just imagine this statistic in itself, I'm sure was created specifically because if you have Tom Thibodeau, he knows nothing about the word minute limitations. When I look about this team, the talent wise, it's pretty even as far as who's scoring the basketball. With him under the helm, he relied heavily on Derrick Rose. Who do you think he should be relying upon when this team needs those wins, those last minute shots? Who's the person they're going to lean on to say? Because you could kind of make the argument that any one of these guys, Wiggins, Levine maybe, or even Cat, has that potential to be quote unquote superstar talent. But we're talking about MVP talent. Does he lean on Big Cat to do what he got from Derrick Rose during his years being the coach of the Chicago Bulls?
Well, I think that he's going to lean on Towns. But as we all know, I mean, I think think it's easier to game plan against a big in the NBA in the last 5 minutes in terms of sending doubles, in terms of, bigs being a little stationary in the post than it is for perimeter guys. So I think that in that vein, I think that Andrew Wiggins is going to get a ton of reps as a clutch time guy, and he's got to be better than he was last year. I think that last year he was a bit of a volume scorer. He did put up 20 a night, and he did. Obviously, he was a fixture on the highlight reels, but I think that he's got to be more efficient this year. I think that he's got to diversify his game a little bit more this year because his athleticism is so diverse and so potentially impactful that I think that he should be impacting the game more than he did last year. I think that, Andrew Wiggins is a guy that should be, ultimately a 22, 6 and 5 type of guy, with, 48% from the field, 35 to 38% from three. He should be one of those guys. And I think that that's his biggest challenge. And being one of those guys on a nightly basis and being that guy that can get you buckets from the perimeter when in the last 5 minutes of the game when it's hard to get buckets from the perimeter or anywhere. So I think that those two are the guys that that Thibodeau is gonna lean on. And you're right. There are no minute limitations with Tom Thibodeau. So it's a good thing that this roster is young.
The roster is very young, as you alluded to, and I think some people have wondered about Wiggins if he's going to be kind of lost in the shuffle in the glow of Karl Anthony Towns. And I agree with you. I think Wiggins has all the potential in the world, but I don't know with Towns there if he's ever going to be a number one type player. And maybe that's better for him because he seems like a guy who wants to kind of not necessarily be in the spotlight like that. He's a little bit more reserved and just wants to kind of do his work and kind of mind his business, if you will. Looking at the rest of this roster, though, there was a lot of controversy over the summer whether or not Ricky Rubio would stay with this team, and then with obviously the addition of Chris Dunn. Where do you stand, I think, with that point guard battle, if you will? Because, I think Rubio obviously can help Dunn and help him mature and grow in the NBA, but a lot of people seem to think that Rubio should be moved, because this team still needs some shooting on the outside as well, too. You look at them all the time, but they don't have any real knockdown shooters. Where do you stand on the Rubio-Dunn kind of rotation?
I'm of the opinion that Dunn is going to pass him up sooner rather than later. I think that Dunn is a terrific point guard prospect. Obviously he's a little bit older than your regular prospect that comes into the league. I believe he's 22 years old, but he's 6'3". He's sturdy. He can get to the basket. He can defend. He's got long arms. I think that he's really, really going to be has a chance to be a significant player in this league. And I think that he was a steal, frankly, for the Timberwolves. So, I think that you keep Rubio around for year one, but heading into year two, I think that you got to figure something out in terms of what you want to do with that position. Rubio's problem is right now he is what he is. He's one of the better defenders as a point guard in this league. He's one of the better passers as a point guard in this league. But, his complete lack of shooting, frankly, it can derail an offense. So I think the Timberwolves and Thibodeau, they'd be wise to try to gouge his trade value around the league and see, exactly what they can get back for him. And you're right, the roster is devoid of shooting. That roster needs a lot more shooting and a lot more spots. And I think that, you can make the argument that Karl Anthony Towns, amongst the starters, is the best shooter. And I think that that's something that probably needs to change for the Timberwolves to truly make a step up the ladder in the Western Conference.
Couple more before we move on from the Minnesota Timberwolves here, though, Tony. So I'm looking at guys like Shabazz Muhammad, and I'm worried to some degree. Maybe that's the wrong word, but I'm interested to see how he's going to mesh, I guess, with Coach Tibbs. because I think Muhammad is a guy who's developed and is really going to be looking to get some minutes, as he really did put in work over, between year one and year two, and now going into, his fourth season. What do you think about Muhammad, and can he be kind of an X factor for this team? And then before we move on as well, too, do you think they have any hope of trading a guy like Pekovic or some of the other, bigs on the roster that they are clearly not going to have any use for?
Yeah, and when you look at Peck, my question is, who trades for him, and what can you get back for him? Because I think that he's got two major problems right now. Number one, he can't stay on the floor, and that's been proven over the last few years. In terms of his body not allowing him to stay on the floor, in reference to injury. And the second thing with Peck, I think that his style of play is fast becoming outdated in today's NBA. If he's on the floor, if I'm an opposing coach and I see Peck on the floor, I'm just clearing out and running a pick and roll with his man every single time, and I'm going to get a good shot because he can't defend out on the floor and he can't defend the pick and roll. A guy like Peck, to me, he's a beast in the NBA 10 years ago. And when you look at today's pace and space, I think that he's really going to have a struggle really fitting in. So I'm not sure what his trade value is, and I'm not sure how you can gouge his trade value in terms of what you can get for him and what team would be willing to take him and his contract on. And then when you look at Shabazz Muhammad, I actually like him. I think that, he's going to emerge as probably the top perimeter guy off the bench for Minnesota this year. I think that Zach LaVine will probably figure out a way to be a starter, or may figure out a way to be a starter. I think he'll be given a chance to. But I think that the Muhammad, he's not perfect. I think that he's a bit of a tweener in today's NBA, but he's a very good post-up player. He's a very good scorer. And I think that, he's a guy that can carve a niche out in this league, which is a question that I had when he came out of UCLA. I didn't know whether he could. Now I really think that he can. So I think that when you look at what he brings offensively and what he brings in terms of getting buckets and providing scoring off the bench, I think that he could prove valuable to this core.
The Minnesota Timberwolves, 29 wins this past season, 16 the year before, 40 wins back in 2013. I'm sure that the Minnesota Timberwolves fan base, knowing now with Tom Thibodeau and this talented cast, can kind of push themselves back into that threshold where they're a 500 or better basketball team much sooner than later. Definitely going to be an interesting season when we're talking Timberwolves basketball. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA with our special guest, Tony Jones from the Salt Lake Tribune, as we are giving you our NBA preview of the 2016-2017 Northwest Division. And as we move forward, hey, the team that finished second to last, the Denver Nuggets, a basketball team that has been mired in just I don't want to use the word mediocrity, but this is a team that has failed to figure out who they really are when it comes to being competitive, not just in the division, but practically in the NBA. Under head coach Mike Malone, this team finished 33-49. And while this is definitely an improvement given the talent, and they've moved past the Ty Lawson days and, possibly, the Wilson Chandler, hopefully he'll make it to the, make it on the basketball court. They still have Danilo Gallinari. They still have some players that they're still trying to feel out and figure out where their placement's going to be on this roster. And Tony, when you look at this Denver Nuggets team, you can't tell whether this team wants to go up, down, or just kind of maintain the status quo.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, it's a mixture of youth and veterans that you can look at it, and you can say, hey, that's pretty odd. I mean, you have Danilo Gallinari, you have, Will Barton, you have Jamal Murray, and you have, and you have Kenneth Faried. I mean, it's kind of a mix between young and established veterans that kind of makes you wonder. But I really like this team's talent. I think, when you look at Emmanuel Mudiay, I think that him having that first year under his belt is going to prove valuable. I think Gary Harris is rounding into one of the better young shooting guards in the NBA. I think that Jamal Murray has a ton of potential. I really liked them drafting Malik Beasley. I really like the Hernan Gomez pick. And obviously Jokic, I think that, that kid has got a chance to really be good. So when you look at the young talent on this team, they have a lot of young talent. And I think that Mike Malone is a really good coach. This is the one guy in the NBA that's been able to get a handle on DeMarcus Cousins and really get the best out of DeMarcus Cousins. So I don't have much doubt from a motivation and developmental standpoint with him, with Malone. So he's got to be able to take this big lump of clay and just kind of mold it. But there's a lot there to like. And I think that if this franchise makes the right decisions over the next year or two, it can set this team up to be successful in the future.
Yeah, this team, like you said, is very loaded. And I think we're all fans of Malone. He was unceremoniously, let go in Sacramento. And again, was kind of the boogie whisperer, if you will, was really got into DMC's ear and got him playing some of the best basketball of his career at that time. And I look at this team now, as you said, having the mix of established veterans and rookies and, young guys. How are they going to mesh this? I think one way they can do that, they were one of, the top 3 teams in bench scoring last year. A lot of those guys are going to have to accept the role. But how do you feel like guys like Wilson Chandler and Kenneth Faried, how are they going to fit back into this? Especially Chandler, who didn't play at all last year. How can Coach Mike Malone get those 2 guys to kind of understand the philosophy of what's going on here, even if there is a philosophy, trying to develop everybody that the Nuggets have?
Well, here's the thing. Right now, the first issue I have with them is, Kenneth Faried and Danilo Gallinari. Now, right now, I think that Gallinari is much more of a stretch much more of a stretch power forward at this point in his career than he is as a small forward. And, of course, Kenneth Faried is a one position guy. He can play power forward. He can be an energy guy. And I think that he's a good rebounder, but not an elite rebounder. He's a good defender, but not an elite defender. So that lack of an elite skill, I think that it makes him expendable a little bit. And I'd honestly, if I were Malone, I'd be looking to bring him off the bench this year and, plug Gallinari in at the 4 and plug them around Jokic and kind of go and score. The problem with this team that I see is this team is not going to defend anybody. And it's not going to be a great defensive team, and it might not even be a good defensive team, but it's going to be a really good offensive team. So, they got to figure out what they're going to do with the log jam that they have in their front court. They alleviated that a little bit when they traded Laverne to Oklahoma City. They have to, figure out what they're going to do with the log jam in their front court because they want to keep developing Gary Harris, but they have to develop Jamal Murray. And Harris and Murray pretty much play the same position. So, you got to figure that out as well as Malik Beasley. So they have decisions that they have to make. But, once they figure out a niche in terms of how they're going to play on each side of the floor, I think that they're going to find a way to be competitive on many nights.
Tony, you bring up an excellent point about Danilo Gallinari and as far as, what he should be able or what he's capable of being able to do and what it might reflect for the Denver Nuggets. Clearly right now he's making a little over $15 million a year. He's making more than, you could probably add 3 or 4 of the players that are currently on the Denver Nuggets roster. He's making, in one season. And to me, it almost feels like they're it may force Malone to have to force the ball to him simply because of the fact that he's practically their best shooter on the basketball court. But you got guys like Gary Harris, who's shown vast improvement in the second half of the season. I mean, how do you see Malone really trying to utilize, Gallinari? You think he's going to continue to use him as that go-to guy, or is he going to try to really figure out a way to allow these other players like Moutier, like Harris, to be able to have that confidence to take those shots when necessary?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think at this point you have to use Gallinari as your go-to guy because he's by far the best guy on your roster that you have in terms of being able to draw fouls and in terms of being able to get to the foul line. Getting to the foul line is a skill, and he's almost in that James Harden class in terms of being able to draw contact and get guys in the air and be crafty off the pump fake. And, that's a valuable skill to have, in the last 5 minutes of games. So, I think that for the interim, you got to give him the ball, and you got to, I don't want to say force feed him, but I mean, he's got to get his touches. And the other thing about Gallinari is, he's the guy that's he's the kind of guy that has to be involved and that needs the ball to be effective. If Gallinari is shooting the ball 8 times a game, for instance, he's not going to hold much value to you because he's not a defender. He's not a great rebounder. He's not a great passer. But he's a great scorer. So you got to give him the ball. But heading into the future, I mean, Moutier's got to get his touches in terms of being a go-to guy. I think that Jokic has to get his touches as being a go-to guy because those are the guys that you're going to be building around for the future. 2-3 years down the road, those are the guys that are going to be 24, 25 years old that are going to be your mainstays. I mean, 4 years down the road, Danilo Gallinari is going to be long gone from Denver. So I think that Malone's got to find a balance between getting the ball to Gallinari and letting him do his thing, as well as developing his young guys. And part of that I think is on Denver management for not going one way in terms of doing something with like what Minnesota did or what Dennis Lindsey did in Utah back in 2012 when he made the conscious decision that I'm just going to go young, exceedingly young, for better or for worse. So this roster is young and old. So I think that that's a bit of an issue, and that's an issue that Malone has to work out for himself as the head coach.
So it sounds like to me you're looking at this team, a lot of their success or failures, if you will, is really going to be on the head coach, Mike Malone, who we all seem to like, and how he manages people's minutes and the rotations that he was given by the front office. So looking at this team, and so looking at the roster and even kind of their starting lineup, based on what we've discussed right now, we have Jokic as the starting center, Gallo as the 4, Moody as the 1, and then it should be Harris and or Murray at the 2. Who do you think slots in at that 3 position? Can they start, Harris and Murray at the same time, or is that where Wilson Chandler now comes in now as a prototypical type of 3-man to be that small forward for them?
Yeah, to me, it's got to be Wilson Chandler because I think that he's, first of all, I think that his talent is pretty vast, and I think that with Wilson Chandler, what you want to do if you're Denver is you want to prove to the rest of the league that guy is healthy, that guy can play, because he is the guy that can really help a contender at the trade deadline. Step in, veteran guy that can really score from that 3 and 4 spot. And I think that if you can prove to the rest of the league that Wilson is healthy, you could potentially get yourself a nice little windfall in return in terms of a potential first round pick from somebody who really needs a scorer like him to step in and aid a playoff run. So I think that that's what I would do. I really like Will Barton, but I think that his style of play is best fitted to a 6-man role. But if it weren't for that, I mean, I really like Will Barton in terms of the way he can attack the rim, and in terms of his athleticism, and in terms of his confidence. He's a guy, and I say this in a good way, he's a guy with irrational confidence. And those are the guys that hit game winners for you. And I think that Will Barton is a guy that can do some things like that for you. So I would go with Wilson Chandler, and I would kind of rock from there.
Quickly before we move on from the Nuggets, Emmanuel Mudiay, obviously their top rookie last season. How much of a development do you think he's going to take? How much in terms of development is he going to grow this season going into second year in the NBA?
Well, the first thing he's got to do is cut down on his turnovers, right? Yeah. Last year he turned the ball over a lot, but he proved that he can score last year. I think that he's got to continue on that scoring track and on that development. But I think he's got to prove that he can run a team. Obviously, he's got to cut down on the turnovers, but in terms of he's a guy that's really good off the dribble. He's a guy that has a lot of size. He's 6'5", and he has a lot of confidence in himself. I think that he's going to be a really good player in this league. So you just got to give him the reins and live with the mistakes. And he's still very, very, very young, and I think that he'll develop just fine.
Denver Nuggets finished 14th in the league with 22.7 assists per game. And while they are a team that can score the basketball, definitely have hurt themselves defensively. Not since 2000. If you go back to 2012, this team has only amassed one 40-plus win season. So clearly the writing is on the wall. Mike Malone has a lot of work ahead of him. But if this team is going to stay young, hungry, and competitive in this division in itself, could actually bold to be a very surprisingly good season for the Denver Nuggets. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our 2016-2017 NBA preview of the Northwest Division with our special guest, Tony Jones. He is writer-contributor for the Salt Lake Tribune. Be sure to check him out on Twitter at TJonesSLTRIB. That's for Salt Lake Trib. So be sure to check it out, man. Write some awesome articles as we forge ahead in our discussion of the Northwest Division, the team that finished third. And, that's where our man TJ comes right in, is that Utah Jazz. And listen, Tony, man, I'm going to tell you, I'm getting tired of them teasing me, man. It's like a painfully excruciating strip tease these last couple of years. This Utah Jazz team should have been in the playoffs one of these last 2 years. And somehow, some way, they just fall 1 or 2 games short from putting themselves in that position to getting that Salt Lake fan base in an uproar like back in the days when you had Karl Malone and John Stockton. And it looks like now they're trying to go for the gusto with the acquisitions of Joe Johnson, and then they picked up George Hill. This team looks like they're trying to find that perfect blend of youth and veteranship that's going to put them in the position to be one of those top 8 teams in the Western Conference.
Yeah, they're all in this year, and the organization realizes that, and they know what's at stake this year. I think that this is, I've been saying this for a couple of months. I think that this is the most important season that the franchise has had in at least recent history. And I would go as far to say is in a decade. This is probably the most important year in terms of the direction of the franchise in subsequent years in a long time. This is, Dennis Lindsey broke it all down in 2012 and decided to build it all up. And he took his lumps in 2013. They traded for Rudy Gobert. They drafted Dante Exum. They drafted Trey Burke. And as we all know, that the Trey Burke draft pick and trade, that didn't work out. But they drafted Rodney Hood. These are all guys, they paid Alec Burks, they paid Gordon Hayward, they paid Derek Favors. These guys are, one of these, it's a team that's really talented. It's a team that's still very young, and it's a team that heading in on paper is very deep. Now, the Jazz, they didn't make the playoffs last year. They finished 40-42. Obviously, they lost to the Dallas Mavericks on the next to last game of the season, and that, for all intents and purposes, knocked them out of the postseason. They suffered an excruciatingly amount of injury. Dante Exum missed the whole season with a torn ACL. Rudy Gobert and Derek Favors both missed about 20 games apiece. So the Jazz went essentially 2 months without at least one of those two in the lineup. And Alec Burks missed basically about 75% of the year with the fractured tibia. So it's a team they didn't have a lot of luck last year. That being said, they were in position to make the postseason. And if they stay healthy this year, the postseason is going to be expected of them. So it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to that bit of pressure and that bit of expectation.
Utah Jazz were, one of the best defensive teams in the league last year, 7th in defensive rating, 2nd in opponents' points per game, but last in pace and 28th in overall in assists. So offense was really a problem for them, and obviously not having a true point guard, making a trade for Shelvin Mack towards the end of the year. I mean, Mack's a nice guy, but he really shouldn't be leading an NBA franchise or whatever the case may be. How do you see some of those issues being, changed this year going into this upcoming season? I was also listening to a podcast Quinn Snyder said where even where the calling card of defense was strong for them throughout the year, it was in the last 5 minutes of game where those ratings dropped, like the lower third in defensive rating and points per game, where they just weren't able to get some of those things done. How does this team get over the hump?
Well, they had a layer of issues last year. I mean, and here's what I mean. I mean, there were a lot of games last year because of the lack of depth that they gave up a lot of leads. The starting five will come out. They play great in the first quarter. They take a 5 to 10 point lead, and then the second unit will come in, and then by the time the starters came back in, they were down 5 to 10 points. And with the acquisitions of George Hill, with the acquisition of Joe Johnson, with the acquisition of Boris Diaw, and the maturity of Trey Lyles, the Jazz are hoping that the second unit is not an issue this year. I think that was an issue last year. Another issue is the Jazz just could not close last year. They lost a ton of games in the last 5 minutes. I mean, they lost a lot of games just down the stretch. And I think that, a lot of that, they put the ball in Rodney Hood's hands a lot down the stretch. And he was in his second year, and he played really well last year. But that inexperience kind of cost him a little bit. And obviously the point guard position cost him a lot. Hal Neto was the starter for about 70% of the season. Shelvin Mack was the starter for the remainder of the season. And here's the thing, the numbers defensively for the Jazz were good. And as you said, they were 7th in defensive rating. Their overall numbers were good. The analytics were very kind to them. They were not close to the defensive team last year that they were the year before when Dante Exum was healthy. Because Dante Exum, he stopped point guards. He stayed in front of guys, and he made it very difficult for opposing point guards to break their defense down. And they did not have Dante Exum last year, and their point guard play defensively really suffered last year. And and it had a ripple effect. It made Rudy Gobert not as effective as he was the year before. It made some of the perimeter defense not as effective as it was the year before. So, as an observer and as somebody who covered the team, you look at the numbers and you're like, hey, the numbers are really good. And I would have to say that I just did not think that was anywhere near as good a defensive team last year as it was the year before.
Switching from the defense to the offense side of the basketball, I think most outsiders looking in would say Gordon Hayward is the team's best overall player and best offensive weapon. You can argue Favors is, probably a close number 2 to that. But what's your opinion on that? With Favors, is Favors the number 2 on this roster, or is it developing and emerging Rodney Hood the number 2 on this team behind Gordon Hayward?
I think that Rodney Hood has the potential to develop into the number 1 guy on this roster. I think that, when you have a guy that's 6'8", that's as good off the dribble that he is, he's a guy that can get to his spot on pretty much any shooting guard. Most of the shooting guards in the league, and get himself a good shot. So I think that in terms of, for the first 43 minutes of a game, Gordon Hayward is definitely going to be your number 1 guy. He's essentially a 20 point, 5 assists, 5 rebound guy a night. But when you need that bucket in the last 5 minutes, and you need isolation buckets, I think that the Jazz are really hoping Hood steps up and becomes that kind of guy, because I think that his game is a little bit more suited for isolation scoring at the end of games than Gordon Hayward is. I think that, Hayward is definitely your best player, your best all-around player. I think I would say he's one of the top 5 or 6 two-way small forwards in the league. I think that if the Jazz come out and are really successful, teams that are really successful typically get at least 1 All-Star. I think that Gordon Hayward would be in line to be that guy. But I also think that the team is hoping for Rodney Hood to really take another pretty big leap. And I think that his offensive talent dictates that he can do that.
Coming off the bench now, too, as we look at some of the other players on this roster, I'm going to give you 3 names, and you tell me which you think is going to be the most important for them coming off the bench. Alec Burks, Joe Johnson, and Trey Lyles, who CL is a big fan of, and I've grown to be a fan of after watching Summer League as well. Which one of those 3 guys are going to be the most important for them, for the Utah Jazz off the bench?
I think that's a great question, and I'm gonna say Trey Lyles, and I'm gonna say Trey Lyles because he's a guy, because you're starting Rudy Gobert and Derek Favors up front, right? So, you're not always going to get great spacing offensively from starting those 2 up front. But those 2 are so good at what they do in terms of finishing around the rim, in terms of defending, that you really want them out there, because it's just hard to score on that front court because of how unique both of those guys are. And both of those guys are very, very unique in terms of being able to defend the paint and actually defend on the perimeter. Trey Lyles can be the perfect complement for those guys, because he is a playmaking power forward. He can really, really shoot the basketball. He can handle the ball. He can pass the ball. He can make plays off the dribble. And if he emerges to where he can, he gives the Jazz a really versatile set of three bigs that I think could be difficult for a lot of teams around the league to match. So I think that his development is going to be a real key. And I think that Joe Johnson is going to be a key in terms of his ability to hit a big shot. And I think that Alec Burks is going to be important because he's the guy who provides that athleticism in the open floor. I mean, you get Alec Burks out in the open floor, more often than not, he's either going to score or he's going to draw a foul. And the other thing is they want to keep Alec healthy. So I think all 3 of those guys are going to be a key, but I think that you really have to look at Trey Lyles in terms of what he can do with his development, because if he develops the way I think that he can, the way a lot of people think that he can, he's going to make that front court really dangerous and really diverse.
The Utah Jazz, a basketball team on the fringe, 24-17 at home, but only 16-25 on the road last season. Also 24-28 within the conference. And clearly their work is going to be definitely not going to be cut out for them, as they are going to be playing in such a competitive division, but obviously the conference has increased as well too. So it's interesting. 1 win short of being a part of that 8th seed in last year's playoffs, can the acquisitions of Boris Diaw, Joe Johnson, George Hill, the development of Trey Lyles, the advancement of Hayward, the combination of Gobert and Favors, can that move this team forward to where we're talking about the Utah Jazz as being a playoff team? They're certainly on the precipice, and I know that we're definitely going to be looking forward to some exciting basketball out there in the Salt Lake area. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our 2016-2017 NBA preview of the Northwest Division with our special guest, Tony Jones, writer and contributor for the Salt Lake Tribune. Be sure to check him out at T Jones SL Trib. Always on the cusp of talking great discussions regarding Utah Jazz basketball, but just in NBA in general. 2 more teams to go to run down, and clearly it was one of the 2 better teams, not just in the division, but also within the Western Conference. A surprise team, the darling team, per se, the Portland Trailblazers, who finished runner-up in this division at 44-38. And what more can be said about the job of Terry Stotts and the game and the emergence of CJ McCollum and the gameplay of Damian Lillard, given the fact that this was a team that was basically stripped from what they did a season before, making it into playoffs. No Nicholas Batum. Their front court completely changed over. And now this was a team that found themselves running toe-to-toe with arguably the best team in the Western Conference, the Golden State Warriors at that time, and pulling off one of the bigger upsets last year with the Los Angeles Clippers. And Tony, when you talk about this basketball team, it just seems like you can throw any player in the NBA, whether it's a top tier or a guy that's just coming straight from the D League at the off the end of the bench. Terry Stotts will find a way to bring out the best of their abilities to contribute for a basketball team that really, to many people's eyes, had no business participating in last year's playoffs. But I guess when you've got a combination of Dame Lillard and CJ McCollum, anything is possible.
Well, first, let me just say that Terry Stotts' Coach of the Year trophy last year is on Steve Kerr's mantle in his living room because Terry Stotts was robbed, and he was robbed.
He was
so
robbed
blindly
twice.
Of that coach. he was robbed so blindly of that Coach of the Year that I had to write a column about it.
It was a WWE move, bro. You know what happens? Like when that one guy looks like he's about to pull out that victory, and all of a sudden the goonery from some tag team runs out. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like the Four Horsemen, they double team and then cost the guy an opportunity to win the world championship title. Yeah, that's what it felt like with Terry Stotts last year.
If Terry Stotts wasn't the Coach of the Year, then they should discontinue the award because as I said, I think that was highway robbery. I'm not afraid to say it publicly, and I just thought that I just thought it was ridiculous that Terry Stotts didn't get that award last year because he took a team that we all thought they were going 20-62, and they won 44 games. They went to the second round. They went to the second round of the playoffs. And, even if they lost to Golden State in 5 games, they were far more competitive than that 5 games, than that 5-game result showed. So, real props to Terry Stotts. He's one of the good guys in the business. And I think that he's one of the best guys that's currently doing it. And Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, obviously that's just a tremendous offensive front court. And Stotts did a tremendous job of surrounding those two with hardworking guys. He did what Larry Brown did with that Philadelphia 76ers team in 2001, which is he surrounded Allen Iverson with a bunch of hardworking, athletic guys who did nothing but care about defense. And that's what Terry Stotts did. I mean, when you look at the contributions of Mo Harkless and Ed Davis and Mason Plumlee, and all of those guys who, turned into and Al-Farouq Amino especially, who turned into 3-and-D type of guys. And, eventually, they ran out of gas against Golden State, but it was just really smart what Stotts did. You got two alpha dogs in terms of who can score. He staggered their minutes perfectly so that one was always on the floor at the same time. I just could not have been more impressed with the job that Stotts did last year, how he handled that roster, how he handled the minutes, how he developed the guys, and how he brought out the best in everybody. I mean, Mason Plumlee really, really looked like a top-tier center last year when he looked like he was a candidate to just be average at best when he was with the Brooklyn Nets. So, I really just had nothing but respect for what Stotts did with that team last year.
So before we, really get into kind of the analytics and some of the statistical analysis of the Portland Trailblazers, we had a Twitter question from our guys over at Buckets and Dimes. Make sure you follow them on Twitter regarding this team and how they can improve. You just alluded to all the things that nobody expected them to do. Now it's that second year where now you have expectations. And they made a lot of moves, I think, over the summer that might even have been a little bit questionable. I didn't expect them to pay Evan Turner the amount they did. I know they missed out on Chandler Parsons, and Turner was kind of their backup plan. But I didn't expect them to re-sign Allen Crabbe once he got that major deal. They re-signed Myers Leonard. They brought in Festus Ezeli. They re-signed Maurice Harkless at a large amount. Where are all these minutes going to go? Because you still have Al-Farouq Aminu, you still have Ed Davis on this roster, you still have Noah Vonleh. Whether or not he needs to play or not, I guess that's debatable. But how now does Stott manage this, and how can they actually improve? Because they're not going to sneak up on people next year.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, you had to be concerned with their offseason because they kind of hamstrung themselves financially going forward, right? So, they committed $70 million to Evan Turner, which was the ultimate head scratcher for me in terms of the financial commitment and just the positional fit on the floor not with the roster, but specifically with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. So they committed $70 million to him. They committed $70 million to Allen Crabbe. Obviously, you had to re-sign CJ McCollum, so you committed a ton of money there. You already have $126 million committed to Damian Lillard. So there's not going to be a lot of room for movement going forward. So this is the team that you have. So what's the end game here? If you're the Portland Trailblazers front office, do you want to just make the playoffs and make the second round every year, or do you want to compete for a championship? And I think that it's fair to ask that question of management when you look at what they did with their offseason in terms of, you committed $40 million in 4 years to Mo Harkless. And right now, where are his minutes going to come from? I mean, how many minutes is Mo Harkless going to get? So, where last summer, we thought that, okay, they stole Al-Farouq Aminu off of the free agent market last year and paid him relative peanuts to what they're paying the rest of their roster. I think, you have to ask some questions of what they did this year. Now, that being said, I think even if they're not sneaking up on anybody, I think that Lillard and McCollum are so good that they're going to win games by themselves in terms of the way they can score. I think that this roster is really deep. I think is still very talented in terms of the depth of role players. I really question the fit of Evan Turner in terms of a guy who he needs the ball to be effective. B, he's not a shooter in terms of making threes whatsoever. And Lillard and McCollum, they need floor spacers, and Evan Turner is not a floor spacer. So, I do really, really question that acquisition, especially if you're going to bring Crabbe back on the restricted free agent market. They have questions going forward, but I still expect them to be a playoff team, and I still expect them to be a very good team.
Tony, you bring up some really great points regarding, where Turner fits into the fold. So I guess now the follow-up question is, and to me, I think that this is kind of the key because as Shaw said a little bit earlier, everybody knows like everybody sees this Portland Trailblazers team coming now. CJ McCollum really won't be sneaking on people. I think people knew that CJ McCollum was going to be good. It was a question of, one, can he be healthy? Because he suffered that injury in his rookie season and then he explodes. But then two, when you have a combination of Lillard and McCollum and you figure out a way to lock them down, or who's the next man up? And you look up and down that roster, are we going to be dictating it by the financials for Terry Stotts to be able to find that? It looked like he was able to get contributions from everyone, but clearly defenses are going to be focused on making sure they shut down their backcourt, and they're going to be looking at their front court pieces to actually contribute more, even if you do factor in a guy like Allen Crabbe. So who's going to be that next guy up to supplement what this team has been getting offensively to be as good as they've been the last couple of years?
Well, that's a great question, and I think, I think when you look at CJ and you look at Dame, you got to blitz their pick and rolls, right? Like you have to double them a lot, and you have to do certain things, especially with Damian, because he's so good off the dribble and getting to the basket, and he's such a good shooter, and he has such range. Obviously you have Steph Curry. But after Steph Curry, there might not be a point guard that's a better threat from half court and in offensively than Damian Lillard. So, you got to do a ton of blitz into their pick and rolls. You got to do, a ton of things schematically to shade help and send help from different places. And those two guys have become really good passers. And, that's where, Harkless and Al-Farouq Amino came in. That's where Mason Plumlee's passing came in, because he had a ton of 4-on-3s as the roll man off the pick and rolls. And that's how they did a lot of their scoring, especially towards the end of the year when teams started to become wise to how good those two were. So I expect them to do a lot more of that just from the start of the year. I think that I'm just one of those guys that I just happen to think that those two, when you talk about CJ and Dame, are just so good offensively that there's very little that many teams can do to shut their water off completely. So in terms of that, I think that there's still going to be just fine offensively. Where I question is, what happens if, if CJ goes down with an injury? What happens if Dame goes down with an injury? If they miss like 5 or 8 games, something like that, and you only have one of those guys instead of 2 of those guys, that's when this team might get into a little bit of trouble, might get into a little bit of issues. But, I think that they have to hope that Crabbe has developed enough that he can do some things off the dribble by himself. I think that they have to hope that Evan Turner finds a real fit into the offense, because, all of their offense is still going to come from the perimeter. They don't have a back to the basket scorer. All of their guys, they have a lot of bigs. But, Mason Plumlee, Festus Ezeli, Noah Vonleh, Ed Davis, all of those guys are sort of similar into the fact that they score offensively just off a hustle. They're hustle guys. So, you're not going to be able to, they're not going to be able to, punch the ball in and, take a possession off CJ and Dame. They're going to be 95% in charge of their team's offense for the entire year. And that's a big strain. It was a big strain last year, and it's going to be a big strain this year.
This team was in the bottom third defensively, but before we even really get into that, I want to ask you kind of the same question we discussed with the last team. I'm going to give you a couple names. Who's going to be the most important bench player coming off this roster? Because even when you mentioned the bigs, you kind of left out Myers Leonard, who I didn't expect them to re-sign, but they did. So between Myers Leonard and Maurice Harkless, I guess who can try to make his calling card defense on this team. You mentioned Allen Crabbe as well too, and Ed Davis. Which one of those 4 guys is most important to their success? I know Crabbe is the scorer, but looking at those other guys, who's the most important for them offensively and defensively coming into the game off the bench?
Yeah, which one of those guys are going to be in the game? That's right. The question. Because Myers Leonard, is he going to be in the rotation? Ed Davis, is he going to be in the rotation? If you look at, off the bench, Myers Leonard, Ed Davis, Noah Vonleh, Festus Ezeli, all of those guys can't play. Not all of them are going to be in a rotation. So, I think that's the question that has to initially be answered. And I think that, when you look at that question mark, I think that Myers Leonard has a chance to be a big key for this roster because he can shoot. He's the one big that they have that can stretch the floor. And I think that's a skill that the rest of the bigs don't have. But to answer the question, ultimately, I think that obviously Crabbe has to be the guy, especially if he comes off the bench. I personally think that he should start at the 3 because, he's a floor spacer and they need that floor spacing, even if they sacrifice size and athleticism by not starting either Mo Harkless or Al-Farouq Amino. But you're paying a man, $70 million. He's got a ratchet for a jump shot. So, I think that you got to put that guy in the lineup and you got to let him play. And I think that he can play off of Damian and CJ. So I'm going to say Crabbe. But I also think that Myers Leonard can definitely have a real impact for this team off the bench.
So, real quick, Tony, what do you think happens with this basketball team with all of the vast improvements to the not even the vast improvements to the roster, but with what they've done to keep what they've got on the roster and the few additions that they've made? When you look at this team, on what side of the ball is it that you think will take the biggest leap forward for them to improve upon the 44-38 season?
Well, I think they have to take a leap defensively, but I'm not sure that they have the personnel to take a leap defensively because Dame's not a defender, CJ's not a defender, and those two guys are going to both be on the floor 35 to 40 minutes a night. So automatically, you look at that and you think, okay, well, if I'm Portland, I just got to outscore people. And that's a lot how they have to win games. So I think that if they could find a way to find a really good mesh offensively, and you look at that, you look at the offensive side of the ball, and you have to ask how big of a leap can they take offensively? If they find the same offensive consistency that they had last year, combined, if they can take just a little bit of an incremental step defensively, I think that they can, at their best, I think they can make a 3 to 5 win improvement. So, you look at the roster and you look at the ceiling of this roster, you think it's, maybe 49-33, 50-32 if everything goes right. But, this is the roster, the one team in the NBA that they can make a 5-win improvement, or they can make they could take a 5 to 6 or 7 game step back. So there's a lot of room for this team, for this team's pendulum to swing either positively or negatively.
Well, amongst us across the board, everybody knows that the proclaimed Coach of the Year, Terry Stotts, definitely has a lot of youthful talent to work with, but clearly the foundation begins with Dame Dash, quote unquote, the rifle sniper out there in the Moda. Damian Lillard, 25 points per game, 6.8 assists, and alongside his sidekick, CJ McCollum, they're going to look to do some serious damage in the Northwest Division. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our 2016-2017 NBA preview with our special guest, Tony Jones, as we discuss the Northwest Division. And finally, the team that finished first. And clearly, the team not only that finished first last season, but also finished first in the preview of all of the hype and drama that happened in this offseason, the Oklahoma City Thunder. This is a basketball team that, with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, in everybody's eyes, they thought that they were the only team really that would be left standing to have the ability or the capability and the firepower to defeat the Golden State Warriors, especially going all the way to the Western Conference Finals. And they were essentially one game away from being able to do it, probably quarters away from giving themselves an opportunity to do it. And unfortunately, that fell through. And so did the hopes, according to a lot of people, that the Oklahoma City Thunder's window of winning a championship would go away once Kevin Durant left and decided to join the Golden State Warriors. And Tony, when you look at this roster, yeah, clearly there's a big gashing hole in that roster with no Kevin Durant. But much to the point that Shaw has somewhat convinced me when they traded to get Victor Oladipo, and you still have guys like Enes Kanter, Domantas Sabonis, who is expected to come in and really fill in some great quality minutes and be an instant NBA plug-and player for Billy Donovan's team. I mean, listen, who knows what can happen, especially in this Northwest Division. No one's saying that any of these teams are going to completely run away with the division, but clearly the Oklahoma City Thunder can give themselves a chance to be in the playoff picture if they're one of the top 2 or possibly 3 teams out of this division.
I will tell you this. I got my bag of popcorn. I can't wait to see what happens with Oklahoma City this year. Look, I think that we've all just wanted to see Russell Westbrook just one time, just be the alpha dog, right? And
unfiltered alpha dog. Exactly. Yeah.
He's got a chip on his shoulder. He doesn't have to defer to anybody. I mean, anything can happen with this guy this year. Like, I wouldn't be seriously, he might average a triple-double this year. Maybe he won't, but I'm just saying.
No, it's close.
He's. I mean, if this guy goes 29, 8, and 7, is it gonna surprise anybody? And does it on like 35% shooting and 26% shooting from 3-point range? It's just. It's like a prospective train crash. You're just going to keep watching no matter what happens. So, I think that. I wouldn't discount Oklahoma City on any point. I think that they still have a ceiling where they can win 50 games. They still have a team that can get to the second round of the playoffs. I don't think they're a championship contender just because of that massive gap that Kevin Durant left. But this is a team that can still win a lot of basketball games and can still make a run in the postseason, and I think that it'll be interesting to watch Victor Oladipo with Russell Westbrook. I really like Oladipo's athleticism. I thought that he played really well for the Orlando Magic in the back half of last year. Now the problem with this team is it's not going to be anywhere near as good defensively as it has been because they sacrificed that tremendous length. Not only with losing Durant at the 3, he was essentially a 6'11" small forward, but we're losing the length of Serge Ibaka at power forward. I remember watching, obviously the Jazz play, the Thunder 4 times, and you looked at that team last year and the year before. I mean, they were impossibly long in terms of their length and their arms. Andre Roberson, 6'7" long arms at the 2. Durant at the 3, Steven Adams in the middle, and Serge Ibaka at the 5. Their numbers weren't great to them defensively, but when they really locked down, I mean, they were really, really good. They were like pterodactyl arms there. So, they're not going to have that great, tremendous length that they had last year. So I do wonder how that's going to impact them defensively.
So we're not going to talk about how they're going to replace Durant, the player.
Well, they're not.
Yeah, exactly. It's impossible. But how do they fill the 3 spot in general? We've talked about this on our show. We'd love to get your input on this. They have Ilyasova, who would be a lumbering 3, started off his career in 3, but we all know he's better suited as a stretch 4. You mentioned Robertson, who could potentially be in that spot too. They wanted to bring him off the bench, but now he may be slotted into a starting position. Morrow hasn't really been the player that he was for his first couple seasons coming into the league as well. They got the guy out of Barcelona, Alex Abrinas as well too. He can maybe slide into that spot. What do they do at the 3 position, or do they need to make a trade with one of their bigs, which seems to be an asset for them?
Well, a guy who I think is going to get a chance is Josh Eustace, really? who was their first round pick a couple of years ago out of Stanford. And, he's toiled in the D League for the last few years, but he's a guy who's a lot like Andre Robertson, really, really athletic, has real potential as a 3-and-D guy. And I think that because of his athleticism, because of his size, because of his ability to shoot the ball, I think that he's going to at least be given a chance to contribute off the bench. And I think that the Thunder, the Thunder brass, their administration, they want to see exactly what they have in this guy. I mean, they spent a first-round pick on him. This is his last year in terms of his contract. So I think that they're going to want to see at least initially what they have in him once and for all. So I'm not saying that he's going to still be the starter, but I do think that he's going to get a chance to be in the rotation and contribute in the rotation. I think that they're going to start at least initially with Andre Robertson. Obviously, he's a great defender at the shooting guard small forward spot. He made life really difficult for Klay Thompson in the Western Conference Finals, except for that Game 6 where Klay just went nuts. But he's a really good defender. He's a guy who can, hit that corner 3. He's just got to be confident in his shot. And I think that Westbrook and Steven Adams are comfortable with him, and they need to maintain that semblance of perimeter defense that they're going to be losing this year. So I expect Robertson to start at 3, and I expect Josh Eustace to be given at least some minutes to see if he can contribute in the rotation.
Tony, interesting thing as well, too, when you talk about this Oklahoma City Thunder front court, it's going to be somewhat of an interesting start to their season. Mitch McGary suspended, I believe, 10 games by the NBA. And then you have the acquisition of Joffrey Lavoisier. So how much does that make Enes Kanter expendable? If obviously he's clearly Oklahoma City Thunder saw something in him, and he actually looked pretty impressive when given minutes and opportunities playing for the Denver Nuggets. It kind of scratched my head as to the reason why they even made this deal to begin with, but clearly this could be Oklahoma City Thunder's gain. But with that being said, that probably means that someone in the front court has got to be considered trade bait to the point that we were talking about before. Does Enes Kanter become that targeted guy you're looking at around trade deadline that could be best suited for, that could be a suitor to other basketball teams?
Well, they gave him $75 million last year, right? So how do you trade that? How do you trade a guy who can't defend, who's got a $75 million contract, even in this climate of the NBA? Where $75 million might not even seem like a lot, where, they're going to be, if you have a team that you have aspirations of going to the playoffs, there are going to be a lot of matchups where he's going to be played right off the floor. Golden State played him right off the floor last year in the Western Conference Finals. He was unplayable. So you can't take advantage of his tremendous offensive skill set because you can't play him defensively, and in a nutshell, that's going to be Oklahoma City's buying this year. There's no Serge Ibaka. So, do you play Ilyasova at the 4 because he can't defend? Do you play Enes Kanter at the 4 because he can't defend? Not only that, you don't have that tremendous length to cover up for their lack of defense. Sabonis, I think, is going to be a good defender, but he's still just a rookie. So I think that, Billy Donovan is going to have a lot of decisions to make. And I personally think that the Oklahoma City's, I wouldn't be surprised if they're just stuck with Enes Kanter's contract. I mean, that's $75 million for a guy that plays one end of the floor.
staying with the front court conversation, much like DeAndre Jordan on LA Clippers, I think this is a make or break year for Steven Adams for this team, Oklahoma City Thunder. Is this year you see Adams potentially averaging a double-double and being kind of the bolstering mainstay of the defense, kind of trying to not necessarily block a lot of shots, but definitely change shots and being very impactful on the defensive side of the basketball?
I thought he was terrific last year. I thought he was tremendous in the playoffs. He's a guy that plays both ends. His question mark this year, his major question mark this year is how is he going to handle essentially being in an offense where he went from, a guy that was at the bottom of the scouting report. So, he could score 15 or 18 and, teams are focused on stopping Durant. They're focused on stopping Westbrook. They're focused on stopping, Deion Waiters off the bench, or they're focused on stopping Cantor and not focused on stopping Steven Adams. He's going to be a little bit higher up the depth chart this year because you look at that. Let's say they start Ilyasova at the 4. So, your starting 5 is Westbrook, Oladipo, Andre Robertson, Ersan Ilyasova, and Steven Adams. Well, all of a sudden, he goes from 5th on the scouting report to 3rd. So he's going to have a little bit more help in his lap in the middle than as much and a lot less space than he had last year to do his thing. So he's going to have to adjust to that. So it's going to be interesting to see. But defensively, he had no issue last year, and I don't think he's going to have much issue this year. Rebounding, he's not going to have much issue. As well. I think that he's a tremendous prospect. He's still very, very young, and I think that he's going to be a really good player in this league.
So when you talk about Adams, and we've talked about other players on this front court, let's move to the obvious addition. And you touched on Oladipo a little bit as well too. But how do you think he's going to really mesh alongside Russell Westbrook this season? Can this be one of the most electric backcourts in the NBA? And again, efficient. I mean, maybe they won't be exactly that. But will they be able to be, a top 3 or even top 5 backcourt in the NBA?
I think they can. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all, just because those two are so athletic that they can put so much stress on the defense. And both of them are very athletic, and both of them are very good off the dribble. And they're both very good getting to the basket, finishing on top of the rim, drawing fouls. I mean, both of those guys can do a lot. The one thing they can't do, they're not great shooters. They are guys who make shots from the perimeter, but they're not great shooters. And I think that people know what the difference is. But they're both really dynamic off the dribble. They're really dynamic in the open floor. They can be dynamic defensively, but they have to each make the choice to be dynamic defensively. It's going to be that's another one of those train wrecks that you want to see. Like they can be either. I think they can be as good as the second best backcourt in the league, or they can implode. I think that there might not be much middle ground in between the two. So I'm really interested in seeing them. But if they really mesh and they really play well together, I think that this team can win a lot of games.
Third seed in the Western Conference, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Tony, look, the bottom line is this: Russell Westbrook, in probably deep down in his heart of hearts, would have wanted this situation where he now is the guy. He is not just the alpha dog; he is practically the omega. And he, to me, feels like he has no problems with doing what he didn't think Kevin Durant is capable of doing. But does that mean that the rest of this team galvanizes around Russell Westbrook and elevates their level of play to be that type of basketball team that I don't think anyone's expecting them to be, no matter how great Russell Westbrook is? Or is this basketball team going to sit there and just watch Russell Westbrook practically dominate the game and post ridiculous numbers, but it doesn't equate to them being the type of basketball team that's going to be competitive, not just in the division, but maybe possibly in the conference itself?
That's Russell Westbrook's biggest challenge this year. Galvanizing this team and rallying this team and affecting this team in the win column, because we all know that Russell Westbrook is going to get his numbers. You know, he's going to be a top 5 player in the NBA. That's what he is. But his challenge this year is to take those numbers and to impact those numbers in the win column, to where this team can win 50 games and get a top 4 seed and get home court advantage in the first round and win a first round series and set up a second round series with the Golden State Warriors that everybody would love to see. So I think that that's his biggest challenge, because if it goes the other way, this team could go from potentially winning 50 to 52 games to winning 38 to 40 games if chemistry breaks down. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of leader on and off the floor Westbrook is. What kind of teammate on and off the floor Westbrook is. And I think he's a good teammate. I think that when Enes Kanter was traded from the Jazz to the Thunder, I think that he was one of the first guys who made Enes really feel comfortable on the floor in terms of their pick and roll chemistry. He's a guy, who once chided Jeremy Lamb for not dapping him up in the huddle. It was like, listen, give me that, So I think that he's a guy who's always wanted this leadership role. He never had it at any point in his career. He didn't have it at UCLA playing with Kevin Love and Darren Collison and all of those great guys. He hasn't had it yet in Oklahoma City. And I think that this is the first time in his career that he's definitely going to have it, where he is definitely unequivocally the guy. And it's going to, I think, one of the top 5 or 6 storylines in the NBA is how he handles that.
So as we ran through 5 teams here in the Northwest Division here, Tony, it is time for our predictions in terms of how we like to do it, in terms of how they're gonna finish, top to bottom, and how many teams actually make the playoffs out of this division for you.
Okay, so I got I'm gonna go Oklahoma City 1. I'm gonna go to Jazz 2. I'm gonna go Portland 3. I'm gonna go Minnesota 4, and I'm gonna go Denver 5. And I'm going to say that Oklahoma City, Utah, and Portland definitively make the playoffs. And I'm going to say that Minnesota Timberwolves are alive in the playoff hunt all the way into the last week of the season, whether they get in or whether they don't.
And I'm going to follow you up here. I think those are great predictions, and I'm going to go slightly different. I think a lot is going to have to do with the Jazz's health. I love this team, and as we have this conversation, it occurred to me that this might be one of the best benches in the NBA. And I really feel like this is a team, if they stay healthy, can have the potential to win it. However, I still feel like something is inevitably will go wrong for them in that regard. I think Portland is going to probably win the division. I'm going to pick Utah going second, OKC being third, and that being maybe a matter of a game or two, not a lot of games between first and third between those teams. I do like the Minnesota Timberwolves as the 4th team and the Nuggets as 5th, and I see the same thing. Those same 3 teams you mentioned, Portland, Utah, and OKC making the playoffs for sure. I think the Timberwolves are going to be right on the cusp of it, and Denver is going to be a competitive team, but just not going to be quite their year. What you have, CL?
Man, this is tough because as we were talking about before, last season the Oklahoma City Thunder looked like so much of a dominant upper echelon basketball team in the NBA. Forget about what they represented just in their division. So when you amass 55 wins and then the next best team is 11 wins behind you, there has to be a big drop off, a disparity for that gap to be closed. With that being said, not having Kevin Durant next to Russell Westbrook certainly betters the odds for teams like the Portland Trailblazers, the Utah Jazz, and even the Minnesota Timberwolves. So I have the Portland Trailblazers being the best team coming out. I have the Oklahoma City Thunder coming in second, the Utah Jazz third. The Minnesota Timberwolves, though, will be right on their heels, and the Denver Nuggets, unfortunately, will finish last in the division. With that being said, if things play out the way that they do with the other divisions themselves, Definitely Oklahoma City and Portland are in there. I think where it really gets interesting is between Minnesota and Utah, possibly making one of the last 2 seeds in the Western Conference, with the Utah Jazz just barely edging them out, meaning those quality pickups that they've made may actually be the key factors to seeing the Utah Jazz finally in the playoffs after 2.5 years of teasing me.
Tony, what are your thoughts on that, man? Any follow up? Actually have a question for you though before we do move on. What, as it occurred to me, what do you think is the best bench out of this division, and who do you think is the most impactful and most important coach in this division?
Well, I definitely think that the Jazz are the best bench. I mean, you look at their bench projection. You're looking at Dante Exum at the 1. You're looking at Alec Burks at the 2. You're looking at Joe Johnson at the 3. You're looking at Trey Lyles at the 4, with Boris Diaw at the 5. Their projected third point guard, Shelvin Mack, was their starter for the last 30 games. Their projected fifth wing is Joe Ingles, who was solidly in the rotation for 2 years. So I just think that this is a really, really deep and talented bench. And I think that even if this team suffers an injury, as long as that injury isn't to anybody like George Hill or Gordon Hayward or Derek Favors, I think that this team can absorb it, unlike last year. So I think in terms of that, and in terms of that fact alone, I think that Utah is probably solidly a playoff team this year. I think that if they squeak in at number 8, I think that they've underplayed expectations. I think that this team is more of a 5 or 6 seed than a 7 or 8 seed.
And I have to agree with you. I think I've watched your Twitter. I've Twitter creeped on you a little bit and see the conversations you had with some of the fans. And some people think they can be high as 3 or 4, and you kind of try to push them back a little bit too. But I think this team definitely should be one that's fighting for home court advantage in the first round in that 4 slot as high. And I think the same thing. I think they're probably more likely a 6 seed too, man. So I can't wait to see how it plays out for the Utah Jazz specifically, but also the rest of the teams in this division, I think are all going to be improved teams, with the exception of OKC. They're just going to be different. So they have no choice but to be a little bit, obviously a lot worse without Durant.
Yeah, I think, that's the thing with OKC. I think that, they win 55 games, but I think that if Westbrook is superhuman like he was 2 years ago when Durant was out for an extended period of time, they can still mitigate some of the damage in terms of being a 47 to 50 win team instead of a 55 win team. Their worst case scenario is if things kind of bottom out chemistry wise, if they don't have enough shooting on the roster. That's another big thing for them. They don't have a lot of shooting on the roster, but they have a lot of athleticism, a lot of guys that can do a lot of things in terms of getting to the basket. So, it's really going to be interesting to watch OKC. But I do think that the Thunder and the Trailblazers and the Jazz, I think that I think that when the final week of the season rolls around, I think they're going to be wondering, where they're going to be in the playoffs, not if they're going to be in the playoffs.
Well, he is the man, and I'm telling you, what a heck of a preview we have laid out here. Our man Tony Jones from the Salt Lake Tribune. Tony, we appreciate you so much, bro, for hopping on board with us, really breaking down, getting into the nuances within each and every single team, and helping to validate, what we've been saying is that, the Northwest Division is practically the new age Southwest Division of the old age. You know what I'm saying? So it's great to see that, because for the longest time, man, we've seen these teams on the precipice of showing us something, and this could actually be the year now that there's a little bit of change, a little bit of flux regarding, the teams team that usually has been dominant over the last 5-6 seasons. Now everybody has a chance and is going to try to make a run to be the top dog in the division. And it's just great because it just makes everything completely competitively balanced when you look at all of these teams up and down affecting each other in some way, shape, or form. So we really appreciate you hopping on board with this week, Tony.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you having me, and this was definitely a blast. This was definitely a blast.
Yowzas! I mean, what more can be said, man? The way that Tony Jones helps us break down each and every single one of these teams. I mean, how can you not look at this division and say to yourself, I wish I had NBA League Pass, because I would love to see some of these division matchups happening through the course of the NBA season. I mean, I know a lot of people's eyes are fixated on what these big name players are going to be doing on their new teams, but a lot of people really need to be paying attention to what's going to be happening out there in that Northwest division, because there's going to be some serious balling happening. And by no stretch of the imagination are we saying that any one of these teams are by and large going to be the best teams, but they certainly are going to be competitive. And I really think that they're going to give the upper echelon Western Conference teams a run for their money. They could actually dictate, seedings for a couple of these teams, whether or not they are in or not in the playoffs.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And it was a great preview to have Tony Jones come on the show and really kind of go in depth on each team and each roster. I feel like, again, they're going to be the most competitive division probably in the NBA, and definitely one of the most intriguing for sure. As we talked about the Pacific being very top heavy, this is very even keel, at least with 4 of the 5 teams really having just legitimate playoff chances. The Nuggets are probably a year away or so, but still looking to see how they develop, especially with a great coach like Mike Malone. So I enjoyed this preview. I hope all the fans and listeners did as well.
Yeah, it's going to be heavily, it's talent laden, no question. Guys like Dame Dash and Russell Westbrook are going to continue to catapult themselves as being the best of the best in the NBA.
Is that his official nickname now? He's officially Dame Dash?
I just feel like he's Dame Dash. I just feel like, pre Rockefeller, you know what I'm saying? Before the split of Rockefeller. But I feel like, his game, his swagger, his approach, I just really feel like everything just seems so effortless. And it's part of who he is and the way that he carries himself. And I feel like he's going to have a crew of guys that are going to want to play as equally hard as Dame is going to be playing. And I just think that they're a type of team that is certainly going to make some noise. But again, when you've got a great coach like Terry Stotts, who at this point has led this team essentially to be where they are, it's hard pressed to not see them as being the best, if the top 2 in the division, if not the best team that's going to be coming out of this division.
Yeah, I mean, for Stotts, it's really going to be about, as we said on the show earlier on, it's going to be about figuring out that rotation, keeping those guys motivated. And if the team, as deep as they are, can they really sustain any type of injury if it were to happen to Lillard or McCollum? Hopefully that's not a bridge that we have to cross. But I feel like Evan Turner is still maybe being a little bit over or underrated. Yes, he was paid a lot of money, but I think he was very successful in the Boston Celtics system. I think he's going to be a guy who can play make for them and be able to score from that mid-range and do his thing. And it's a guy who can hit shots down toward the end of the games as well, too. So, again, that money, that contract is absolutely ridiculous. But I think he'll fit in nicely. Alan Crabb is another guy, too, who we both really like. Yeah, they just got paid, and I think that's what some of the concern is. But Stotts has to find a way to manage all those minutes, and even to some degree, some of the egos that are going to come along with it.
I think the one big question that will definitely come out of the Northwest Division, and when we talk about that, because all eyes will be fixated on the Minnesota Timberwolves, because I think a lot of people are going to be talking about how exciting this basketball team is. But if you've got a guy like Tom Thibodeau who's going to emphasize this team to play defense and play better defense, I wonder if that's going to compromise, quote unquote, the excitement and the explosiveness of this basketball team, because we've known that while Tom Thibodeau has had a great cast of members, out in Chicago, they've never played the prettiest basketball, even during that MVP season with Derrick Rose. I think it was 2011. So to me, I look at this and saying, yeah, expect this basketball team to be marketably better. But I don't know if you're going to be getting that quote unquote flashiness that we're now seeing from most of these teams in the NBA. That might be compromised if the expectation is that this Timberwolves team is going to be one of the better teams out of that division.
Yeah, again, they'll have to play differently. As Tony alluded to, they need to play defense first and foremost. That was a huge problem for them. scoring should not be too much of an issue, although they still don't have knockdown guys outside on the perimeter. They have enough where I think they can get it done. And they even added a guy like we didn't talk about, Brandon Rush. He could again, come in, spot minutes, and maybe shoot down the three. He's been injured the last couple of seasons, still trying to get his career back on track. But this team in general is probably the most exciting in terms to watch and in terms of what people have with expectations of making improvement. And I think they lead the list when it comes to that. I think right behind that is obviously watching OKC's Russell Westbrook and seeing how he really matures and what he does this season. Again, could he average a triple-double or near that? And how efficient will he be doing it throughout the season? So again, great excitement throughout this division. Looking at 4 teams that could very well fight for playoff seeding and should be in the playoffs, with Minnesota coming very close. And then obviously, like we said, Denver probably outside looking in, but they're not going to be a pushover. They're going to be a very, very tough team throughout the entire season. So again, one of the better divisions out there in the NBA.
Either upset or be upset. Make upsets or be upset is what is going to really be the motto for this division and how they're going to pan out. I'd like to thank our man, Tony Jones from the Salt Lake Tribune, for helping us out with this awesome preview of the Northwest Division. As you know, the Baseline NBA podcast continuing our coverage of this year's upcoming 2016-2017 NBA season by giving you the preview. So be sure to lock us in, download, and discuss. We'll be all over the Twitter boards. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.